I'm Mike, 37, a retail manager who's been married to Jessica, my wife of 12 years. For most of those years, I thought we had a rock-solid marriage. We weren't perfect, but who is? We had routines, laughs, and dreams for the future. I believed we were happy. But over the past year, things have shifted in ways I can't ignore. Jessica has always been outgoing, the life of any gathering, and quick with a smile that could melt anyone's bad day. It's part of what drew me to her all those years ago. But lately, that warmth has started to feel calculated, like she's performing for an audience I can't see. It started when she launched her interior design business. At first, I was thrilled for her. She'd always dreamed of turning her talent for decorating into a career, and I was proud to see her take that leap. But as the months went by, Jessica began spending more time networking than she did at home. She started coming home later, brushing off my questions with vague answers about meeting clients or attending industry mixers. "It's just business," she'd say, her tone a little too light, her smile a little too forced. I wanted to believe her. But then there were the small things. Her phone became a constant companion, always clutched in her hand or tucked away in her purse with the screen facing down. She'd giggle at texts, then glance at me like she was checking to see if I'd noticed. And the perfume, Jessica's never been shy about trying new fragrances, but this one wasn't hers. It clung to her clothes, subtle but unmistakable, like a stranger had been too close for too long. I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice these things right away. But I brushed them off, told myself I was overthinking. Jessica was busy with her new venture, and I was buried in work. My boss, Rick, had been riding me harder than ever. Rick's a piece of work, let me tell you. He's charming in that way that makes people trust him too quickly, but I've seen the other side, the manipulative, self-serving one. Since he became regional manager last year, my workload has doubled. He's always finding excuses to keep me late, assigning projects that conveniently require extra hours and then criticizing me for not spending enough time with my team. It was exhausting, but I figured this was the price of trying to climb the corporate ladder. I told myself that Jessica and I were just going through a rough patch. Couples do that, right? Maybe it was just the stress of her business and my job pulling us in different directions. But something about Jessica's behavior kept tugging at my gut. When I'd kiss her goodnight, she'd turn her head slightly, like she wasn't fully there with me. Intimacy, once a comfort for both of us, had dwindled to almost nothing. And when I'd bring it up, she'd sigh and blame it on being tired or overwhelmed. The thing is, I wanted to believe her. I really did. For 12 years, I trusted Jessica implicitly. I believed in us. But as much as I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my chest, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. I kept telling myself, it's just work stress. You're imagining things. But deep down, I knew better. Something was off, and no amount of denial was going to make it go away. It was a Wednesday night, one of those long, soul-draining shifts at the store. Rick had thrown another last-minute project at me, something about redoing the floor layout before corporate came to visit. I'd barely grabbed a sandwich for dinner, my hands raw from moving display cases around. All I could think about on the drive home was collapsing into bed next to Jessica, maybe sneaking in a quiet moment to reconnect. But the second I walked into the house, I knew something was off. The lights were still on in the living room, and Jessica's laptop sat open on the couch. Normally, she was meticulous about shutting it down. A glass of wine, half empty, stood next to it, leaving a faint ring on the coffee table. I called out, "Jess." No answer. She was probably upstairs getting ready for bed. I dropped my bag by the door and glanced at the screen, intending to close it and head upstairs myself. But then I saw it. The email. The subject line read, "Last night was unforgettable, red heart." My heart stopped. For a second, I thought maybe it was spam or a joke. I leaned in closer, praying I was wrong, but the preview text below hit me like a punch to the gut. You looked amazing in that red dress. I can't stop thinking about how soft your skin felt under my hands. I've never felt this way before. Last night was everything. It was from Rick. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling as I clicked the email open. The rest of the message laid it all out in excruciating detail. Dinner at some boutique hotel downtown. The way they couldn't keep their hands off each other. The time they spent together afterward, upstairs in a room that Rick had booked, just in case. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was reading. Was this some sort of mistake? A cruel prank? But the words were too personal, too familiar. And Jessica's name was right there in the replies, thanking Rick for the evening and promising that it would stay between them. I stared at the screen, frozen in place. My ears rang, and for a moment, I thought I might throw up. Then, I heard the sound of footsteps. Jessica walked into the room, wearing one of those silk robes I bought her for our anniversary. Her hair was damp, like she'd just stepped out of the shower. When she saw me on the couch, her face lit up for a second, but then she noticed what I was looking at. Her smile disappeared. "Mike," she said, her voice an octave too high. "What are you doing?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just looked up at her, holding her gaze as I turned the laptop toward her. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and all the color drained from her face. She stammered, taking a shaky step forward. That's nothing. Rick was he's been helping me with business stuff. You know, like advice." "Advice?" My voice came out low and flat, like it belonged to someone else. "Does he give all his business contacts unforgettable nights at boutique hotels?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her hands flew to the laptop, slamming it shut with enough force to make me flinch. "You're misunderstanding this," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it, Jess?" I snapped, standing up so quickly the coffee table shook. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my wife is sleeping with my boss while I'm breaking my back at work." She took a step back, her robe slipping slightly off her shoulder. "Mike, please. You're being paranoid. Rick, he's been a mentor. That's all." "Mentor?" I spat the word like it burned my tongue. "He described your skin. He mentioned the red dress I bought you for our anniversary, Jessica. Do you think I'm stupid?" She crossed her arms over her chest, her face turning red. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Rick has connections. He's been helping me get my foot in the door with clients. This is all just business." "Business." She kept using that word like it was some kind of shield, like she thought she could gaslight me into thinking this was all in my head. "Do you think I'm blind?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of my anger. "You didn't even try to hide it, Jess. The late nights, the secrecy, the perfume that isn't yours. And now this?" Jessica's eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape route. "It was a mistake," she blurted out, her voice frantic. "A stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything, Mike. I swear." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Didn't mean anything? You've been sneaking around with my boss for who knows how long, and it didn't mean anything. You let him touch you, Jess. While I was at work, killing myself to support us, you were out playing dress-up with him." Her lip quivered, and for a second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But just as quickly, it was replaced by something else, defiance. "Maybe if you were home more," she snapped, her voice sharp and venomous, "I wouldn't have felt so alone. You're always working, Mike. You don't even see me anymore." And there it was. The excuse. The justification for her betrayal. She wasn't sorry, not really. She was angry that I'd caught her. The worst part? I tell myself as I replay the moment. She didn't even apologize. Not once. She just lied, fumbled for excuses, and tried to make it my fault. I shook my head, feeling the last shred of trust one had for her crumble. "You're unbelievable," I said quietly. "You've been lying to me for months, and now you're trying to make me feel guilty for it." Jessica stepped closer, reaching for my arm. "Mike, please. We can fix this. It's not as bad as it seems." I pulled away, her touch feeling like poison on my skin. "It's worse, Jess. It's so much worse." I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in the living room, clutching the laptop like it was the only thing holding her together. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, the weight of what I'd just uncovered settled in my chest like a stone. The woman I'd loved and trusted for 12 years had betrayed me, not just with anyone, but with the one person who had the power to ruin both my marriage and my career. And the worst part? I wasn't sure which hurt more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she had the nerve to blame me for it. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rick's email, his smug, self-assured tone as he described what he and Jessica had done. The words replayed in my head like a cruel mantra, cutting deeper each time. By the time dawn broke, I wasn't angry anymore, I was numb. But I knew I couldn't let it fester. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Jessica was already up when I came downstairs. She was standing by the kitchen counter, nursing a cup of coffee, her back to me. She must have heard my footsteps because she stiffened but didn't turn around. "Morning," she said, her voice tentative. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk." She sighed, setting her mug down and finally facing me. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy from what I assumed was a sleepless night of her own. "Mike, about last night." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Don't. Just tell me the truth, Jessica. What's going on between you and Rick?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might actually come clean, but then her eyes narrowed, and she folded her arms across her chest. "Nothing is going on," she said, her tone defensive. "Rick's been helping me with my business." "That's it. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I felt a surge of anger break through the numbness. "Helping you?" I said, my voice rising. "Jessica, I read the email. I know what you did at that hotel. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me." Her cheeks flushed red, and she looked away. "It wasn't what it sounded like," she muttered. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," I snapped, taking a step closer. "Explain to me how my boss describing what you wore, how you felt, and what you did with him is somehow just business." She flinched but held her ground. "It was a mistake," she said quietly. "A stupid, one-time mistake. I wasn't thinking, and it just happened." I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. "A mistake? That's the best you can come up with? You didn't trip and fall into his hotel room, Jessica. You made a choice. And don't even try to tell me it was just once. I'm not an idiot." Her eyes flicked back to mine, and for the first time, I saw cracks in her facade. She opened her mouth to respond, but then the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she blurted. "I didn't mean for it to become something more." The room spun. "Something more?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her lips trembling. "Mike, please." "How long?" Her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. "A few months," she admitted, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear her. "A few months." The air seemed to leave the room, and I staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've been lying to me for months, I said, the words tasting like ash. While I've been working myself into the ground, you've been sneaking around with Rick. And you have the nerve to blame it on a mistake. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. Mike, I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was lonely. You're always at work, and Rick, he was there for me when you weren't. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and unfamiliar in the quiet kitchen. Lonely? You were lonely. Do you think I want to work 60-hour weeks, Jessica? Do you think I enjoy being away from you? I was doing it for us, for you. And this is how you repay me. Her tears spilled over, and she reached for me, but I jerked away. Mike, please, she pleaded. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I love you. I shook my head, the last remnants of my composure crumbling. No, you don't, I said, my voice shaking. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to my face over and over again. You wouldn't have betrayed me with the one person who's made my life hell at work. Rick manipulated me, she said desperately. He pressured me into it. Don't, I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't put this on him. He's a scumbag, sure, but you let it happen, Jessica. You chose this. You destroyed us. Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Every word she said felt like another twist of the knife she plunged into my back. It was like every excuse she made was a knife to the gut. She wanted me to believe this was my fault, but how do you justify betraying someone who's killing himself to support you? I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. Grabbing my keys off the counter, I turned and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, her voice thick with panic. Anywhere but here, I said without looking back. The sound of her sobbing followed me as I stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting me like a slap. I got into my car and drove, not caring where I ended up. All I knew was that I needed to get away, from Jessica, from the lies, from everything. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me like a physical force. This wasn't just about her and Rick. It was about every promise we'd made, every moment we'd shared, every dream we'd built together, all of it shattered in an instant. For 12 years, I thought I knew the woman I married. Now, I wasn't sure I knew her at all. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I parked in a grocery store lot and sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard. My emotions churned like a storm, anger, sadness, confusion, but beneath it all was a suffocating sense of betrayal. How could Jessica do this to me? How could she stand there and blame me for her choices? The next day, I dragged myself to work, running on fumes. Rick was already there, of course, his usual smug expression plastered across his face. When I walked in, he barely glanced up from his phone. Mike, good timing, he said without looking at me. I need you to cover for Darren this weekend. He's taking some personal days. You can handle it, right? I stared at him, my fists clenching at my sides. His tone was as condescending as ever, but now it carried a new weight, a silent dare. He knew. He knew I knew. And he was enjoying every second of it. Sure, Rick, I said tightly, my voice betraying none of the fury bubbling beneath the surface. Over the next few weeks, Rick seemed to delight in pushing me to my limits. Extra shifts, last-minute projects, impossible deadlines, he dumped it all on me with a smirk that made my blood boil. I tried to stay professional, but every interaction felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of my own resentment. At home, things weren't much better. Jessica was a shadow of her usual confident self, tiptoeing around me as if afraid I might explode. When we did talk, it was strained and awkward, like two strangers forced to share a space they no longer recognized. She kept saying she wanted to fix things, but her apologies felt hollow, her promises empty. One night, after another grueling shift, I sat down to pay the bills, a task I'd always handled since Jessica never cared much for numbers. As I scrolled through our joint accounts, something caught my eye, a series of unfamiliar charges. Expensive dinners at upscale restaurants. Hotel stays in the city. Jewelry from a boutique I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. The timestamps lined up perfectly with Jessica's late-night, client meetings, and business trips. She'd been using our money to fund her affair with Rick. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking with rage. It wasn't enough that she'd betrayed me emotionally, she'd drained our finances, too. Every penny I'd worked so hard for, every hour I'd sacrificed, had been spent on her lies. That was the final straw. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to an attorney I'd found online. I didn't tell Jessica about the call or the meeting we scheduled for later that week. The second was to HR. I couldn't keep working under Rick. Not after everything I knew. I'd already started documenting his unprofessional behavior, every inappropriate comment, every unfair assignment. Now, I had the emails, too, and I wasn't afraid to use them. The meeting with the lawyer was surreal. As I laid out the details of my marriage, I felt like I was describing someone else's life. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, listened intently, her pen flying across the page. "You've got a strong case for infidelity," she said when I finished. "If we can prove misuse of marital funds, that's another point in your favor. Do you have access to any evidence?" I nodded, pulling out a folder I'd hastily thrown together. "Emails, bank statements, screenshots," I said, handing it over. She flipped through the documents, her expression neutral but focused. "This is good," she said finally. "Very good. We'll draft the divorce papers immediately. I'll also send a letter to your wife, requesting a temporary freeze on joint accounts until we can sort this out." Hearing the word divorce sent a pang through my chest, but I knew it was the right choice. Jessica had shown me who she really was, and I couldn't keep pretending that things would go back to how they used to be. By the time I left Linda's office, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I was taking control of my life again. At work, the HR meeting was equally productive. I laid everything out, Rick's favoritism, his abuse of power, and the personal relationship he'd been carrying on with my wife. The HR rep, a stern man named Greg, took notes silently, his brow furrowed. "This is serious," he said when I finished. "We'll need to investigate before taking action, but rest assured, this won't go unnoticed." I wasn't sure if Rick would face any real consequences, but filing the complaint felt like a small victory. Back at home, I started quietly packing my things. Jessica noticed, of course, but she didn't say anything at first. It wasn't until she saw the legal documents on the counter that the dam broke. "You're divorcing me?" she said, her voice rising in disbelief. I looked at her, my expression blank. "What did you think was going to happen, Jess? That I'd just forgive you and we'd go back to normal?" Her face crumpled, and she started to cry, but I didn't feel the usual pull to comfort her. "Mike, please," she sobbed. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my voice calm but firm. "It's too late for that. You didn't just hurt me, Jessica. You destroyed us. And I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore." She stared at me, her tears falling silently now. "I was scared," she whispered. "I thought you didn't care about me anymore. Rick made me feel." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't try to justify this. You made your choices, Jess. Now you have to live with them." As I walked away, a strange calm settled over me. The anger and sadness were still there, but they were tempered by something stronger, resolve. I couldn't let her lies define me. I deserved better, and I was done letting them walk all over me. I never thought I'd be the guy sharing his story on a forum like this. For most of my life, I believed that loyalty, hard work, and love were enough to build a lasting relationship. Jessica and I had years of memories, laughter, and promises that I thought were unshakable. But the last few months have shown me that even the strongest-looking foundations can crumble when trust is replaced by lies. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: listen to your gut. Trust your instincts. The signs were there long before I found Rick's email on Jessica's laptop. The late nights, the secrecy, the way she pulled away from me emotionally, all of it was pointing to something I didn't want to see. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just stressed from work. I ignored the red flags because I didn't want to believe the woman I loved could betray me like that. But here's the thing about betrayal: it doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about how hard you've worked or how much you've sacrificed. Betrayal creeps in when you're not looking, and before you know it, everything you thought you knew is gone. In the weeks since I filed for divorce, I've had a lot of time to reflect. There's still pain, of course. You don't spend 12 years building a life with someone only to walk away without scars. But there's also a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm reclaiming my life, piece by piece, day by day. Jessica tried to reach out a few times after I left. She sent long texts, called late at night, even showed up at my new place once, begging me to give her another chance. But I knew better. I knew that taking her back would only mean more lies, more pain, and more excuses. As for Rick, well, karma caught up with him faster than I expected. HR took my complaint seriously, especially when I handed over the emails as evidence. It turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been on the receiving end of Rick's abuse of power. A few other employees came forward with their own complaints, and last week, I got the news: Rick's been fired. I wish I could say it felt like justice, but honestly, it was just another reminder of how much damage he and Jessica had caused. Still, knowing he's no longer in a position to exploit anyone else gives me some peace. If you're reading this and you're seeing signs, subtle changes in behavior, excuses that don't quite add up, a growing distance between you and your partner, don't ignore them. I'm not saying you should jump to conclusions, but trust yourself enough to ask questions. To dig deeper. To protect your heart before it's too late. Jessica thought she could have it all: my trust, my love, and someone else on the side. Rick thought he could use me as a pawn while sleeping with my wife. They underestimated me. Leaving wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I've ever made. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I'm living for myself. So if you're in a situation like mine, take this as your sign. You deserve better. You deserve honesty, loyalty, and respect. Don't settle for less. Take your power back.